pleased to be able to host this event for Global Net 21 and see you all here. It's an issue which for many isn't a new issue, but for politicians and for some of the public out there it's become a particularly pressing issue, not least through the benefit of media. And not least television media that has seen horrific images going out into people's lounges and wherever they're watching, or whether it's on the handheld machine, they're seeing horrific images which has prompted people for action. Now, many of us well before that horrific image of Aylan Kurdi washed up on the Turkish shores, which particularly prompted a groundswell of additional concern. Many of us would have been out there, and my voice and others, and many of you here, months, years before, expressing a need and concern about human dignity that shouldn't just be prompted by a particularly appalling, shocking image that sadly isn't just a one-off event, but is a daily event for many people fleeing persecution, fleeing a worse situation and seeking sanctuary. But nevertheless, it did prompt many, indeed, it prompted politicians to suddenly wake up and take notice, and so they couldn't ignore the plight of refugees, and particularly the plight of Syrian refugees. In my bio, which I was just reading here from Francis, he included the fact that I was one of the first Conservative MPs saying that we should take thousands, not hundreds, of Syrian refugees. And it's interesting for you to say that. Certainly it's factually true, but it's also interesting because it's something which, when we had that situation going on, and this is what I want to draw out, is what response we're giving to issues of human dignity that transcend borders, they transcend backgrounds. There should be a cause of common concern is the plight of refugees. And when we see that visibly on our screens. But why is it that I was in fact the first Conservative member to speak up about it, and I spoke about it just as a natural response. Like anyone seeing it, I responded in social media and others said, look, this is unacceptable. What I've been saying for months is even more so the case, that we should be at the very least accepting thousands of Syrian refugees, not barely at the time. The relocation programme was up to 214 that we'd accepted, which was derisory and was unacceptable. But why was it that there were very few of us making that stand? It was people said to me, well, how brave, thank you so much. What courage for making that stand. Well, it's not at all really, and it shouldn't be in a situation where it is particularly courageous or brave to be saying that we should accept our historic mandate, our responsibility as this country to accept refugees. There's international conventions, there's agreements, and there's our basic human concern for our fellow brothers and sisters who need refuge. It shouldn't be something that's particularly marked or unusual, but nevertheless it was, and hopefully it played a part in helping to turn the government to its attention to doing what it at the very minimum should be doing, which is accepting thousands more, up to now 20,000 are saying, Syrian refugees. But the wider issue is one that I've been involved in, which is not just about numbers, and we can, particularly politicians can get stuck on the numbers of how many we accept, how many we don't, what is the issue in relation to the right numbers that we should be accepting. That debate there will go on. But it is a profound issue of principle and a matter of human dignity that should transcend debates around refugees, around migration, and it's something that shouldn't just be afar. It shouldn't just be about the other. And unfortunately in debate it becomes very much an issue about the other out there and our fears and concerns about the other. It's something that we should have a greater solidarity together about, a concern, a common concern about those in distress. But it's something which we can't escape, and it is the other person is very much on our doorstep. And it's interesting, particularly when we look at the British public's response to the issue of refugees, is that when it's further afield, and we are generous, we are one of the most generous in terms of international aid and support, we are right up there In terms of our international aid, apart from America, we are more generous, and we must hold to account very much those other countries, particularly those other European countries that really aren't coming to the table and providing the international aid that is so needed. Because when one's talking about displaced peoples who end up often in camps, we're not talking about months, 1 year, 2 years. On average, we'll talk about 17, 18 years that people are displaced in camps, and that is a long-term issue that needs long-term support that I'm proud that this government has given in difficult financial times, but also in better ones, and wanting to call others to account. So we shouldn't forget that there is a very important role about supporting from afar in relation to international aid. But it's interesting that when the dynamic of the public's opinion comes around, and it was marked in that picture of that poor child on the shore, is that when it is humanised, when a name is given to a particular person who's lost their life or is in distress, then we wake up. And it's the case that if you know someone on your street, in your neighbourhood, who is going through an issue in relation to maybe seeking asylum, there's a real concern, and people campaign and support individual people. But when it's seen afar away, there's something that's happening even in Calais or even beyond, people aren't so connected. It's far away. But as soon as it is humanised, as people see, and I think they appreciated in relation to the picture of the child, they saw that that could be their own child, that could be someone down the street, their family, then it makes a difference to people. It shouldn't be that way, but that is the way. And I've seen that in campaigns in relation to one constituent, Yoshiko Bagorati. She was someone who was a student who her story wasn't in any way as desperate as many others, but nevertheless she was someone who was facing deportation to Mauritius. Again, not the one highest up the list of those countries that is the most desperate, but nevertheless she was being deported halfway through her taking her A-levels. She was studying in Enfield and taking her A-levels, and halfway through that, suddenly she was whipped up and deported away from her family because the only reason is she suddenly turned the age of 18, and she was treated separately from the rest of her family and deported. Now, and this is interesting in terms of the network here, is that there were a bunch of students at a secondary school in Enfield that, quite rightly, thought this was unacceptable for this to happen. And they then petitioned, they contacted me, and I got involved, and I did what I could as a Member of Parliament, speaking in Parliament, speaking to the ministers and the Home Secretary, speaking in the Home Affairs Select Committee about this, and getting Yoshika's mother to the Home Affairs Select Committee. And that Yoshika became, you may remember, she became very much a face of others who have faced deportation, who are left in appalling conditions in a detention centre, and then are deported away without any proper concern around the family links or a proper compassionate concern of treating someone with dignity all the way through the process, even indeed if it was right for her to be deported, not to treat absolutely fairly all the way along. It was so unnecessary for her to be deported in that way. And it grabbed the attention of the public. The same public who are concerned about immigration numbers and wanting controls over our borders and others were very concerned about the handling of that individual, who one, as I said, could find better examples, as it were, of someone who is facing a worse situation back in Mauritius. But nevertheless, because it was humanised, and indeed young people were there campaigning hard for it, it grabbed the attention of the media, and it grabbed one thing, and it grabbed my attention in terms of the issue of immigration detention. And following on that, actually, I resolved that we need to do more in relation to detention to make sure that we treated everyone fairly. Those people who come without judgment, whether fair means or foul, when they're in this country, we need to treat people absolutely fairly with human dignity. They have human rights all the way through the system and process, even when they may need to be deported. And so with other members of Parliament, I conducted an all-party inquiry into immigration detention, and seeing it as really unacceptable that in the course of a year there could be 30,000 people who could be locked up. And they will not know how long they're locked up for. I'm a criminal defence solicitor, and the first question I get asked when someone ends up in prison is, when am I going to be released? That's the first question they want to know. They want to know the earliest date they're going to be released. I cannot give that answer to someone who's in immigration detention. The issue for them is they're not counting down the days for release, they're counting up the days. And it's a profound concern that we can have in effect indefinite detention, which is against all international and human rights laws and indeed the laws of this Parliament and this Parliament, which has its foundation of great values which have put it in a good stead across the world in relation to treating people fairly wherever they're from and ensuring that they're not locked up purely on administrative reasons, but every due process is followed. And that must happen in relation to those who are in the immigration process. And so with the Members of Parliament from all sides, we've been campaigning hard to ensure that we have at the very least a time limit to detention, that a 28-day time limit has been put forward, as well as treating people with better respect. There are people that today who are pregnant, who are locked up, who don't know when they'll be released, and then their concerns are not being considered. There will be a report. We have a report coming out. The Shaw report will come out later this week on Thursday, I think, and that will look at Yarlswood Detention Centre, which has been in the news, has been in the Channel 4 documentaries, and has shown, sadly, that we have not treated people in detention centres with that respect, with that human dignity that they deserve. And this country should be proud to advocate. But sadly, we cannot be proud about our record in relation to immigration detention. We are out with the rest of Europe in not having a time limit. We're out with the rest of Europe and other countries. You could take Australia, not known for its liberal regime in relation to immigration. You could take Australia, and they themselves do not have this system of lengthy detention for migrants. And that's refugees, and that is something which we need to turn around. We need to be in a position where we constructively engage with people throughout the immigration process, that we're not treating as a default position because we don't know how to deal with people, or we can't find their information related to identity, that we are going to lock people up and work out things after we've locked them up. So there is hope at the end of that campaign, which has been joined by many here and others. And we're looking forward to this Shaw report, which is coming out on Thursday, which will point to a better future where we do treat people with better conditions and dignity. We also have an immigration bill which has made its way now next week up to the House of Lords, which will also be looking very carefully at the Shaw report and the amendments that were put forward by myself and others in the Commons to see whether the time is now right to try and transform the system so that we do limit the time that people are in detention. But I suppose in conclusion, because I appreciate we have others to speak who want to allow you time to engage with us, I suppose the long and short of all of this is that wherever we're dealing with the situation of refugees, whether it is in immigration detention centres, whether it is as people are pursuing their asylum application in this country, or indeed whether we're involved in our responsibility in other countries, we need to treat people with a common sense of human dignity and respect that everyone deserves.